Welcome to PCM Bite Size, a series of short, informative videocasts with experts in their field. The theme for today's session is e-commerce, digital's next wave. As e-commerce hits new highs during the pandemic and consumer habits change at an ever-increasing pace, PCM asks what these changes mean for acquirers, merchants, and consumers. I'd like to introduce our expert for the day, John Burns. He's the managing partner at Accord, a payments consultancy based in London. John, the consumer shift in attitude to e-commerce. Tell us a bit about what's going on in the market.
Well, I think what's going on in the market, certainly from an e-com perspective, is certain sectors are experiencing, phenomenal growth as a result of COVID, as a result of some of the restrictions for essential shopping. I think consumers have rushed to the internet, and those merchants who are internet enabled have certainly benefited from that. And more interestingly, Alex, and when we look at this, consumers are adopting the mobile channel, and it's estimated that 20% of this peak season's expenditure in the e-com channel will be on mobile. So some, absolutely great numbers coming through in the data.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a pretty good picture out there if you're an e-com retailer. What are the implications for these acquirers and merchants from this exceptional growth over such a short period of time?
What's good practice in the ecosystem for e-commerce? And certainly making sure that you've got sufficient bandwidth. Lots of organizations have, taken advantage of software as a service and rushing to the likes of AWS for capacity planning. There has been some challenges for some of those ecosystem players, not least gateways. There's been some availability issues and just falling over through unexpected volumes. Good practice there is to make sure that you're engineered for peak, and peak is something new. It's the new world that we live in, the new COVID world. And just on that, I think that some of the volumes that we're seeing now, they're just going to be maintained. The sad news is it's at the expense of the high street, but this discussion's about e-com. So yeah, you need to have a robust, well-engineered environment, both gateway, acquirer, and not least the payment scheme sitting in the middle of that. Yeah, look, challenging times, but nothing that I think that the ecosystem can't cope with. Perhaps more challenging has been, that with that move to card not present comes the risk of greater fraud. And I think that's perhaps an area where the industry, on reflection, will be glad that it's invested time and money in sort of preventing card not present fraud.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those challenges in a little bit greater depth. You've mentioned fraud, you've mentioned capacity. Any views or any further views on the aspects of fraud that we're seeing?
If you look at the card not present data, you can actually see that fraud in card not present has increased. So the growth in e-com is huge, but correspondingly, fraud is increasing in that e-com space. I think initiatives like 3DS2 and strong cardholder authentication have just come in time. And I think that will have a significant impact in reducing fraud, but also comes at a cost. A 3DS2 implementation is expensive, challenging, and puts cost onto the purchase price.
So from the perspective of your clients coming to you with these kinds of challenges, what kind of bite-sized practical advice could you give to people around fraud and around capacity planning?
I think it's sort of like getting your environment agile, nimble, and able to take extra capacity. Web services are a really great way of making sure you've got that capacity. 3DS2, you've just got to either choose a vendor or develop it yourself. So a lot to play for. I think that, as we go into 2021, I think e-com will still dominate our purchasing behavior. And I think there's plenty in the toolbox to make sure that we keep fraud at acceptable levels.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for your bite-sized insights. I look forward to seeing you again in the flesh. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.